So, welcome to Jumbo IS and welcome to our lecture series called Daily News in Shorts. In this lecture series, we cover a particular day's current affairs in a short span of time within 30 minutes. Now, the purpose of this lecture series is very simple. We don't want you to waste your time in covering current affairs. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean current affairs aren't important, but we don't want you to spend your entire day reading the newspaper. So, we will cover current affairs on a daily basis, but we won't spend that much of your time. We will just cover current affairs within 30 minutes. But 30 minutes is not all. Okay. Just after watching this lecture, you have to revise this lecture as well, because it is through revision alone that you can solidify these current affairs in your memory. Okay. You can remember these current affairs for longer periods of time, or else you'll forget them very quickly. Now, you have to just spend 20 to 25 minutes revising these current affairs. So 30 minutes of watching the lecture and 20 to 25 minutes of revising these current affairs, and in about 50 minutes time, you'll be done for the day as far as current affairs are concerned. Your entire day is freed up. Spend as you want it. Okay. Now, where can you revise these current affairs from? Along with this lecture, we'll be sharing notes of this lecture, and these notes shall be shared on our Telegram channel. All you have to do is just download these notes from our Telegram channel and spend 20 to 25 minutes revising them. Now, where can you find our Telegram channel? Below this video in the comment section, you'll find a link. That link will take you to our Telegram channel. So all you have to do is just click on that link. It will take you to our Telegram channel, and from there you can download our notes. All right. Okay. So enough of the introduction. Now let's straight away jump into the lecture, beginning with taking a look at the topics of the day. Okay. Which were the important topics that featured in today's newspaper? So in total, we'll be covering 5 topics, because these were the only 5 topics that were important from the perspective of civil services examination. Number 1 is Windfall Gains Tax. Recently, Government of India announced that the Windfall Gains Tax that it applied 30 months ago on petrol, diesel, crude oil exports, it has removed that. It has scrapped that. So what is this Windfall Gains Tax? We'll talk about this. Then in USA, the Great Lakes region of USA, a weather phenomena has appeared that is called lake effect snow. So what is this lake effect snow which has caused so much snowfall in that region? We'll talk about this. Then recently, as you all know, because if you have been watching our current affairs lecture, you know this, that a summit has been going on in Busan, South Korea, which the purpose of which is to come out with a legally binding treaty on eliminating plastic pollution. Now, that summit has ended in a failure. No international legally binding treaty has come out of this summit. So, what were the reasons of this summit's failure? We'll talk about this. Then recently, Niti Aayog came out with a report. The name of the report was Trade Watch. In that report, Niti Aayog said that India has failed to capitalize on the China plus one strategy. Now, what is China plus one strategy? And if India did not capitalize on it, which other countries did? We'll talk about this. And currently, a very deadly disease is going on in Rwanda, Africa. Okay, it's called Marburg virus disease, or the bleeding eye disease. So we'll talk about this disease as well. Okay, so let's begin the discussion, starting with topic number 1, which is Windfall Gains Tax. So what has been in the news? Okay, so government has withdrawn the Windfall Gains Tax that was applied on domestic production of crude oil. Generally, we import crude oil from Iraq, Saudi Arabia and other countries, Russia also. But there is some amount of crude oil that we produce ourselves. So government had applied Windfall Gains Tax on that. Then government had also applied Windfall Gains Tax on export, not selling of these things in domestic markets of India, export of diesel, petrol and aviation turbine fuel, which is used to power airplanes. So government levied Windfall Gains Tax on production of crude oil. Then that crude oil is refined and sent to petrol pumps across India. That is okay. But if that refined crude oil means petrol, diesel and whatnot. These are the refinery products, okay, that comes out of refining crude oil. The export of these products was taxed. Okay, so remember, government did not tax petrol, diesel, aviation, turbine fuel for domestic consumption in India. They taxed it for export, and they taxed domestic production of crude oil. Now, this levy was introduced 30 months ago, and now it has been scrapped. Now, the important question is, what is Windfall Gains Tax? All right. So basically, the definition is that Windfall Gains Tax is a higher tax rate on profits that ensue from a sudden windfall gain to a particular company or industry. Okay, let's suppose I am selling a pen. Okay, and I sell this pen for 100 rupees. My production cost for it is 50 rupees. Okay, so I basically produce this pen for 50 rupees, I sell it for 100, and my profit is, in this case, 50 rupees. Okay, and government taxes my profit at, let's suppose, 10%. So 10% tax on my profit, that is 5 rupees. But let's suppose suddenly the price of pen, market price of pen, jumps to 200 rupees. Suddenly, my cost of production remains the same, 50, but the price, market price of pen just jumped up. Definitely, my profits have increased by 100 rupees then. Now my profits are 150 rupees. Now this increase in my profit is called windfall gain. And government says that we are definitely taxing you for your profit at 10%, but because of this additional profit which is called windfall gain will also be taxed at 10% more. Okay, now this extra 10% which is levied on your windfall gain means sudden increase in profit, okay, because of exogenous circumstances, external circumstances, is known as windfall tax rate. Okay, windfall gains tax basically. Now this was levied on production of crude oil in India. This was levied on exports of petrol, diesel, and aviation turbine fuel. Now, if this was levied on these products 30 months ago, definitely producers of these would have had a lot of windfall gain. By that, I mean their profits must have suddenly increased. Yes? Yes, they did. Because in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. And because of that, the international prices of petroleum skyrocketed. Okay? Because of Russia-Ukraine war, the prices of petroleum, petrol, diesel, and crude oil skyrocketed. Now, this actually gave a windfall gain to domestic producers of crude oil and exporters of petrol, diesel, and aviation turbine fuel. Now, their production costs remained the same, but because of external circumstances, geopolitical circumstances, their profits increased dramatically, which is called windfall gains. So the government decided to tax that, okay, because government wanted to increase its revenues. Now, these windfall gains tax levied on crude oil production in India and export of petrol, diesel, ATF from India was levied as a cess. Okay. Now, what is a cess? Cess is basically tax on tax. So, a tax on this 10% that was already being paid before the sudden increase in profit. A tax on this tax, okay, is known as cess. So, my earlier tax was 5 rupees on my 50 rupee profit, right? A 10% tax on this would be 0.5. So 10% tax on a tax. This is a cess. And cess is basically levied for a specific purpose. So this windfall gains tax was levied as a cess, okay, on the central excise duty. So they were already paying central excise duty. So a tax was levied on it, which was called a cess, which can also be called a windfall gains tax. So it was imposed on fuel exports and domestic crude oil production to tax supernormal profits of fuel exporters and oil producers. Okay. In the case of domestic crude oil and ATF exports, it was levied as special additional excise duty. So this windfall gains tax was levied as special additional excise duty. And in case of exports of diesel and petrol, it was levied as road and infrastructure cess. Okay. Now all of this was kind of a windfall gains tax. Remember, windfall gains tax. Windfall means supernormal profits that were generated suddenly. Okay. All right. So this has been now scrapped. So this tax has been scrapped. Now, why was this tax levied in the first place? Okay, reasons for levying this tax 30 months ago. Okay, and then we'll talk about why has it been scrapped. So the reason for this levying this tax 30 months ago was government wanted to increase its revenue. Government knew that these producers are gaining a lot of profit. So there is no harm in extracting some more money out of them. This would definitely boost government's revenue, which government can use on social services, and would also not harm the producers that much because they are gaining super normal profits. So the major purpose was to increase government's revenue. All right. The other reason was, and this was more important, okay, because people were gaining more by exporting petrol, diesel, and aviation turbine fuel. people were gaining, people were having more profits by exporting these commodities rather than supplying these commodities to India. Domestic consumption. Okay. So most of these producers of petrol and diesel started taking away from the supply to India and export them. So domestic supply of petrol, diesel and ATF in India started to shrink because most of them found that it is better to export it because it is through that you will earn more profits. Selling it in India won't earn you that much profit than exporting it. Okay. So domestic supply of petrol, diesel and ATF declined, and because of that there were many problems. So government wanted to somehow make these exports less attractive, so they imposed a tax on it. Now, by imposing this tax, it was not that lucrative for these exporters to export, and they started supplying these things to India, and the supply of petrol, diesel, ATF in India increased. Okay, so these were the major two reasons. Okay, this was the major reason. Second, first reason was a side benefit, it increased government's revenues. Now, why has the government decided to withdraw this now? First of all, supply in India has reached optimum levels, so there is no issue of supply. So there is no problem in, or there is no problem in exporting these amounts abroad. Okay, because supply in India is normal now. So there is no rationale behind stopping exports. All right. Plus, the revenue from this tax also started to decline. Somehow, because people stopped or reduced their exports, revenue also declined. So government was also not earning that much revenue. Plus, supply was normal in India. So government decided to stop it. All right. This was the thing. Okay, but the important concept to take away from this news item is, what is windfall gains tax? Okay, now you know. All right, let's shift focus to second news item, which is lake effect snow. So look, as you can see, this is USA, right? And to the north of USA is Canada. All right, between USA and Canada, this region is known as the Great Lakes region because the very important big lakes are found in this region. As you can see, blue water bodies, these are the Great Lakes. Now, the American states surrounding these blue water bodies, these states are known as the Great Lakes region. Now, this region has received unusually high snowfall in recent times. Okay, and this unusually high snowfall is because of lake effect snow. All right. Since Friday last week, 1.2 meters of snowfall has fallen on this region. Now, what is lake effect snow? Okay, let's talk about this. So, lake effect snow occurs when cold air, mostly from Canada, because to the north of Great Lakes is Canada. So, most of the times, cold air from Canada comes to these Great Lake regions. Okay, now Great Lake regions are generally warm, and because of these large water bodies, the air is also moist. It has a lot of moisture, water vapor. So when this cold air comes, it replaces the warm and moist air. Now, what does this warm and moist air do? It rises upwards. Okay. And just above the Great Lakes, the vacuum is taken over by cold air. So cold air actually replaces this warm and moist air, and this warm and moist air rises rapidly. When it rises rapidly to the atmosphere, in the atmosphere, when it rises upwards, it starts to form clouds, very thin clouds, but it forms clouds, okay, because the air is laden with water vapor. And because there are cold conditions, these clouds start to precipitate. And when they precipitate, they give out snowfall. Okay. As the cold air passes over unfrozen and relatively warm waters of Great Lakes, warmth and moisture are transferred upwards into the atmosphere. The air rises, clouds form and grow into narrow clouds that produces heavy snow. Now, remember one more thing. These are very narrow clouds. Okay, so they have the capability of giving unusually high snowfall in very narrow regions. Okay, so unusually high snowfall happens in very narrow regions. So it can be the case that one region in Great Lakes region receives very high snowfall, and just 3 or 4 kilometers away from that region is bright sunshine. Okay, because it's a highly localized phenomenon because these clouds are very narrow. Plus, which region will receive high snowfall also depends on the direction of wind. because high speed winds have the capacity of moving these clouds away to different regions. So it depends on the direction of wind where this snowfall would descend. Okay, so this is what lake effect snow is, and this phenomena is quite common in the Great Lakes region. Okay, now the states that border these Great Lakes are New York, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and many others. Okay, Michigan. So this is the phenomena called the lake effect snow. Remember this because geography is part of your syllabus, right? Okay. Moving on to topic number 3, which is failure of global plastic treaty. So the global talks in Busan, South Korea on curbing plastic pollution ended in a failure to adopt a final legally binding treaty. So basically, in 2022, United Nations Environment Assembly decided to come out with a legally binding international treaty to end plastic pollution by the end of 2024. And for that, they had held 4 rounds of negotiations. Now, the fifth round of negotiations were happening in Busan, South Korea. And this fifth and final round of negotiations also ended in a failure. So, what UNEA, United Nations Assembly, decided in 2022 in Nairobi to come out with a legally binding treaty by 2024, this promise of theirs or this resolution of theirs was left unfulfilled because of the failure of talks in Busan, South Korea. Okay. Now, why did these talks fail? Why didn't the countries or why couldn't the countries come together to come out with a legally binding international treaty to end plastic pollution? Surely everyone agrees that plastic pollution is a problem. Then why didn't countries agree with each other? Surely there must be some points of disagreements within that treaty. Okay. So the major point of disagreement was production cap goals. So basically, countries, a group of 100 countries, which included African countries, Latin American countries, and European Union. This group of 100 countries actually came out with a proposal. They said that the reason why there is high plastic pollution is because there is high plastic production. Because we're producing so much plastic, that is why this plastic is thrown out everywhere, right? That is why there is high plastic pollution. So they came out with a proposal to come out with legally binding limits on plastic production. Okay, so they were putting limits on plastic production and they were aiming to reduce plastic production. Now, thing is that there are some countries which are petroleum countries. Okay, they produce a lot of petroleum. And plastic is a byproduct of refined petroleum. So when you refine crude oil, it produces petrol, diesel, aviation turbine fuel. It also produces Vaseline, kerosene, and it also produces primary polymers or plastics. Okay. So these crude oil producing countries don't want a reduction in plastic because it would lead to a lot of economic losses to them. Okay. So a coalition of like-minded countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Russia, Iran, all are oil producing countries and plastic is a byproduct of oil. They opposed these production cap goals. They opposed this proposal of reduction in plastic production. Now their argument is that plastic production and plastic pollution are two different things. You can produce plastic, but you can also side by side take steps to reduce plastic pollution. You can use recycling, you can use reusage. So plastic pollution is different. We have gathered here, these like-minded countries said that we have gathered here to reduce plastic pollution. So there can be other steps to reduce plastic pollution. Don't talk about production cuts. And you know what? India supported these like-minded countries. India said that plastic is required by developing countries because it solves a lot of problems. Okay, plastic is required by domestic developing countries. So you shouldn't uh, actually basically you shouldn't put the developmental goals of developing countries to halt just because you want to end plastic pollution. Plastic pollution can be ended through other ways also, but we can also allow developing countries to grow simultaneously. So developing countries can grow, their growth shouldn't be compromised. Side by side we can end plastic pollution. These two things can go side by side. So please do not put any production cuts on plastic, and we'll take all the steps to reduce plastic pollution. This is what was told to these 100 countries by these like-minded countries and including India. So basically, what was India's stand? Okay, India said that there should be no production cuts. Plastic pollution is different from plastic production. We can carry on with plastic production and side by side also take steps to reduce plastic pollution. Okay. Plus, this this draft treaty, or these 100 countries were also proposing a plastic pollution fee that would be levied on plastic production. So anyone who produces plastic would also pay, along with other taxes, a specific fee, plastic pollution fee. India opposed that. Plus, India said that plastic pollution, or controlling plastic pollution, would require a lot of money. So controlling plastic pollution would require a lot of money. Plus, it would also require a lot of technological interventions. Okay. Both these things are not available, or not available in sufficient quantities, with developing countries. So it is the job of developed countries to provide developing countries with finance and technology transfer so that they can take steps to end plastic pollution. So India is also saying that the international legally binding treaty should have this proposal also. India basically said that a balance has to be struck between preventing plastic pollution and protecting sustainable development of developing countries. So you should not compromise on the development of developing countries. So plastic production shouldn't be reduced. Plus, developing countries should be given finance and technology. Okay, and no plastic pollution fee should be levied. This is India's stand. Okay. Now, who was spearheading this movement to end plastic pollution? It was United Nations Environment Assembly. So let's talk a bit more about this organization. So what is UNEA? Okay, so it was established in 2012 at United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. It functions under United Nations Environment Program, and it is the world's highest decision-making body on environment. Its headquarters are in Nairobi, Kenya. So remember this part. All right, that would be all. And now let's move on to our fourth news item, which is China plus one strategy. Okay, so what was in the news? First, let's talk about that. Then we'll talk about what this China plus one strategy is. So, as per Niti Aayog's report, the name of the report was Trade Watch. India has seen limited success so far in capturing China plus one strategy adopted by multinational companies looking to de-risk their supply chains. So, basically, what Niti Aayog has said that India has basically failed in taking advantage of China plus one strategy employed by various multinational companies. Okay, India failed to take advantage of that, but many other countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, they took its advantage and are prospering. Okay, now the question is, what is China plus one strategy that India failed to take advantage from? Okay, so look, basically the thing is that China is basically the most dominant supplier of goods. Most of the goods used in the world are supplied from China. Okay. In fact, most of the multinational companies, American companies, European companies, they have also established their factories in China. Okay. Because China provides them with a lot of facilities. So even though they are American companies, they are manufacturing in China. So that is why China is the dominant supplier of goods to the world. All right. Now, the thing is that in recent times, especially during COVID lockdown, China implemented some of the most brutal lockdowns, which prevented these factories from operating, these factories in China from operating, which actually led to a lot of supply shortages of goods all over the world. Okay, because most of these companies were dependent on China for supplying these goods because most of the factories were in China. So now, when China is shut down, there would be supply shortages, global supply shortages. Now that created a lot of problems. So eventually, these companies decided that they should have alternative countries also, alternative friendly countries also, where they can set up their factories. Okay. And from where they can get their supplies if China is not functioning well. Okay. So they basically need an alternative to China. And this strategy of multinational companies was called China plus one strategy. So they would have factories in China, but they cannot put all their eggs in the China basket. They cannot put all their factories in China. They need some alternative also. Okay. Because what if next time in future China completely shuts down? They cannot be in that vulnerable position again. So they need alternative countries. Now, China plus one. Now, this plus one can be any friendly country. Now, experts were saying that India can take advantage of this because if all these multinational companies want to diversify from China, they can set up their factories in India. This would not only boost manufacturing in India, it would also provide a lot of jobs and would increase India's GDP significantly. It would also boost India's exports. And who knows, maybe sometime in future, India becomes a dominant supplier of goods in the world. So India should take advantage of this China plus one strategy. But Niti Aayog report says that India has not taken that much advantage from this strategy as it could have taken. In fact, other countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, they have been able to capitalize on this strategy. Okay, and India needs to quickly repivot itself so that India becomes an attractive destination for these companies who are employing China plus one strategy. Okay, so what did this report say? It says that Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia have emerged as bigger beneficiaries of China plus one strategy. Now, the reason for that is they have cheaper labor than India. They have simple tax laws. So, countries find it easy to establish factories in these countries. They have lower tariffs, import export duty, and they are very proactive in signing free trade agreements. So, because these countries have free trade agreements with many other countries, goods from these countries can be supplied to different parts of the world without paying any tax because they have signed free trade agreements. So, these 4 or 5 factors played a crucial role in these countries taking advantage of China plus strategy. Okay, so companies actually opted for Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia rather than India. Okay, while China remains India's leading competitor across most export categories, countries like Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa generally trail India. However, Malaysia and Thailand have outperformed India. Okay, this is the case. So India needs to quickly re-strategize and make sure that this global shift in supply chains, India stands to gain out of it. All right. Okay. And our last news item is related to the bleeding eye disease. We'll talk about the reason why it is called bleeding eye disease, but its technical name is Marburg virus disease. Now, it has killed around 15 people and infected at least 66 in Rwanda as of November 29. It is often referred to as bleeding eye virus, but its actual name is Marburg virus. Now, if you are infected with Marburg virus, then the chances of you dying range from 24% to 88%. So, if 100 people are infected with this virus, chances are that from 24 to 88 people would die. Now, that's a very high mortality rate or fatality rate. Okay. Now, this year, the first case of MVD came in Rwanda, and it has been going on in Rwanda. Okay, Rwanda has been the most affected country by MVD. Now, what is this Marburg virus? Okay, let's gather some details about that. So, Marburg virus belongs to filovirus family of viruses. Okay, another example of filovirus family is Ebola virus. So, Ebola virus and Marburg virus belong to the same family of viruses. Okay. Now, the first ever Marburg virus disease that was recorded was in 1967 in Marburg, Germany. Marburg is a town in Germany, and that is why it is called Marburg virus, because its first outbreak took place in Marburg, Germany. But since then, most of the outbreaks have happened in Africa. Okay, Tanzania, Rwanda. Okay, it happened once in Germany, but after that, most of MVD cases have been from Africa. In fact, it is such a dangerous disease that World Health Organization has put MVD in a list of pathogens that pose the greatest threat to public health. So WHO comes out with a list of viruses and bacteria which pose the greatest threat to humanity. Marburg virus is in that list. Okay. Plus, another reason for putting Marburg virus in that list is that there is no medicine or vaccine for this disease. Currently, there is no treatment for this disease. Okay. Now, what are its symptoms? How does this disease spread? What sort of treatment is given if you are infected with MVD? Okay. So first, let's talk about mode of spread. So initially, it was thought that people who go to mines and caves where Egyptian fruit bats reside, well, they catch this disease. So it was thought that you catch Marburg virus from exposure to Egyptian fruit bat. Okay. But recently, WHO says that human to human transmission is also possible. Okay. Earlier, it was thought that you get this virus from bats only. But now you can get this virus from an infected person also. You can have direct human to human contact. That means you can directly come in contact with that person's blood or other bodily fluids. Or you can also contact this virus from other humans indirectly by coming in contact with objects or services that were contaminated or that were infected by their fluids. So if someone's blood drops on an object, okay, and that blood is infected with Marburg virus and you touch that object, you'll also contact Marburg virus. So it's very deadly. Okay. Now let's talk about symptoms. And from this, you'll also get the answer to this question: why is it called bleeding eyes disease? Okay. Now the symptom is basically, if you get this virus, the symptoms start to appear between from 2 to 21 days. Okay, so it takes this virus around 2 to 21 days for your body to show symptoms. Okay, that is known as incubation period. Now, what does it lead to? It leads to hemorrhagic symptoms. Now, what is hemorrhage? Hemorrhage means bleeding. So this virus leads to bleeding symptoms. So you start to bleed from your gums, you start to bleed from your eyes, you start to bleed from your hands, and internal bleeding also starts to take place. So you start to bleed within your digestive tract, gastrointestinal tract. Okay, so hemorrhagic symptoms start to appear, and because of a lot of blood loss, people die. Currently, there are no approved vaccines or specific treatments, but if someone is infected with this virus and someone is having this disease, well, you can provide them with supportive care. Okay, if they're losing a lot of water because of blood loss, give them ORS. Okay, give them if they're losing a lot of blood, then blood can be supplied through various interventions. All right, but these are symptomatic treatments. They just cure the symptoms. They don't treat or they do not kill the Marburg virus. Okay, so it causes bleeding, hemorrhagic symptoms. Hemorrhage means bleeding. That is why it is called bleeding eye disease, because sometimes you bleed from your nose, gums, and at times you bleed from your eyes as well. All right. So, yeah. And with that, we conclude today's session. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And please do not forget to revise these current affairs, or else you'll forget them very quickly. So, please spend another 20 to 25 minutes revising these current affairs. All right. Okay, so that would be all from my side, guys. Please do not forget to post your doubts in the comment section below if you have any. Okay, so if you have any doubts, please post those doubts in the comment section below. I'll be happy to entertain them all. All right, that's it from my side, guys. I'll see you next time. Thank you.